Notre Dame's playoff hopes have been on the line every weekend since mid-September, but this matchup against Pitt is going to tell us whether the Irish are title contenders or pretenders. And coming up, we're answering your biggest questions to get you ready for Saturday.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up? Welcome in. This is Locked On Irish, your daily home for Notre Dame football. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is now the #1 sports podcast network in America. I'm Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018. Now I'm a producer at Fox Sports, and I've been covering the Irish for the last 5 years. It is Friday, November 14th. So happy Friday, everybody, and thanks for starting your game weekend right here by making this your first watch or listen of the day. And before we dive in, make sure that you are subscribed to the Locked On Irish YouTube channel and on your favorite podcast platform, so that way you never miss an episode. And with Notre Dame just one day away from taking on Pitt in a massive November showdown, we have got a great Friday mailbag loaded with questions, so thank you to everyone who submitted theirs this week. We're going to dive into what the Irish absolutely must do to win tomorrow. I'm also going to talk about the matchup that I can't wait to see and which results across the country could help Notre Dame's playoff path. Then we'll hit some bigger picture topics like ideal playoff opponents, the future of the quarterback room, and whether realignment could shake up the Big Ten in a way that might even reignite the rivalry with Michigan. And as always, we're going to close it out with the fun stuff, talking about some favorite memories from being on campus at Notre Dame, music that reminds me of college, and even a question about Chris Ash's sideline demeanor that I think a lot of you have probably wondered about at one point or another. So we have got a lot to cover today. Let's get into it. Our first question comes from Brill Rollinger. What is the most important thing Notre Dame has to do in order to beat Pitt? I think it's pretty simple. They have to at least get a draw on the line of scrimmage, specifically when Notre Dame's offense is out there on the field. I think Notre Dame's defense is going to win the battle in the trenches, but it really comes down to how Notre Dame's offensive line matches up with Pitt's front seven, because Pitt has been elite at stopping the run this season. They are first in the entire country in yards per carry allowed. They were able to shut down Isaac Brown, Louisville's running back, who is very good. He's now injured for the Cardinals, but that was a very impressive performance, and I have no doubt that their game plan is going to be centered around stopping Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price from running the football. But if Notre Dame's offensive line can create some running lanes for Love and Price, we know how good they can be. We know that they can break off a long chunk run at any given moment. But it's not just about creating lanes for the running backs. It's about protecting C.J. Carr, because I think C.J. Carr could have a really, really good game so long as he's protected. And lately, even though the offensive line hasn't always been great, in the rushing game, they've been really good at protecting C.J. Carr. So if the running backs have lanes to run through and Carr has time, I think Notre Dame's offense is going to have a big day. But it's going to be tough. And one thing about Pat Narduzzi, he's going to try to create some havoc. So they're going to blitz Notre Dame on early downs. They're going to try to get some tackles for loss in the running game, and they're going to blitz C.J. Carr. But as we've talked about on the show, C.J. Carr has been very good against the blitz. So as long as Notre Dame's offensive line can hold up against Pitt, they should be just fine in this game. All right, our next question comes from @AndrewWood_95. Which matchup are you most excited to watch on Saturday? Well, this is perfect because it piggybacks off the first question here. I cannot wait to see Notre Dame's passing game going up against Pitt's secondary. I think Pitt is going to dare C.J. Carr to beat him. And as we've seen in the past with Pat Narduzzi, he's very stubborn. So if that is their game plan, they are going to stick to it. If C.J. Carr is 300 yards passing in the game, they're probably still going to stack 7 or 8 guys in the box, because that's just how Pat Narduzzi is. And even if you don't know that much about Pat Narduzzi's scheme, just think back to 2015 when Notre Dame traveled to take on Pitt on the road when they had Deshaun Kaiser at quarterback and they had Will Fuller at wide receiver. Narduzzi continued to run man coverage on Will Fuller. Sometimes he did it with the safety. And guess what Notre Dame did? They just went to Will Fuller over and over and over again. And Will Fuller finished that game with 7 catches, over 150 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns. And guess who was the offensive coordinator for that game? It was Mike Denbrock. So I think Mike Denbrock is going to figure out which matchup in the secondary he wants to exploit. It could be with Malachi Fields. It could be with Jordan Faison. It could be with Will Pauling. It might even be the tight end, Eli Raridan. Either way, they're going to try to exploit those matchups and then throw the ball downfield. Because if C.J. Carr plays really well in this game, the Irish should be able to blow them out. I thought the USC game would be Carr's coming out party for everyone in the national media, right? Because all the Notre Dame fans, we already know about CJ Carr and how good he is. But I think against USC, the conditions and also the way that USC decided to defend Notre Dame just made that a lot harder for them. They were dropping 6 guys back in coverage despite the fact that it was pouring rain in that game. And CJ Carr had his worst game of the season, but it was okay because Notre Dame was able to run for over 200 yards. Jeremiah Love himself had over 220 in that game. I expect Pitt to do the opposite. I think they're going to stack the box to stop the run. And if they do that, Carr can throw it over the top. And on the outside, I believe Notre Dame has a clear advantage. Sean Lee is a good cornerback for Pitt, but he's a true freshman. I don't think he's seen receivers quite like the ones that Notre Dame has. And in Pitt's loss to Louisville, Miller Moss threw for 339 yards, 3 touchdowns, and just 1 pick. And that was after Pitt made Louisville one-dimensional. They held Louisville to just 53 rushing yards in that game, but it didn't matter. Miller Moss, who is a lesser quarterback than CJ Carr, still threw the ball all over him. There is a chance that conditions could play a factor in this game because it seems like every single game that Notre Dame plays this season is terrible weather. There is some rain in the forecast now, but Carr looked really good in the rain and snow last week. I think he's going to be just fine on Saturday. Okay, at G. Bellotti asks, can we get a specific who to root for guide this weekend to help Notre Dame's playoff path? Well, it is a loaded slate of college football this weekend. I love it. And it's rare that I am excited for Notre Dame to be playing in the noon window, but honestly, this works out perfect because Notre Dame goes out there, they play at noon, and then after the Notre Dame game, there are 3 games that you should be keeping an eye on. The main one is Alabama playing against Oklahoma. Ranked matchup. That's going to be a really fun game to watch. You should be rooting for Alabama to knock off OU because a 3-loss Oklahoma team is going to be eliminated from the college football playoff. And I think that Alabama is likely going to do that. But then there's another game during the 3:30 window. NC State is going to be playing Miami. If NC State beats Miami, Miami is going to be eliminated from the college football playoff because there's just no way they're getting in with 3 losses, and it would put them really behind the 8 ball in the ACC conference championship race. So Miami would be eliminated, and then we would not have to deal with a situation where the college football playoff committee has to debate a 10-2 Notre Dame team versus a 10-2 Miami team who has the head-to-head advantage. Plus, if NC State beats Miami, it's a boost to Notre Dame's resume because they handled NC State 36-7 earlier in the year. And then there's USC Iowa. That's at 3:30 Eastern as well. And the better that USC plays, the better it is for Notre Dame, obviously. I understand that we don't want to root for USC under any circumstances as a Notre Dame fan, but as USC continues to stack wins, then Notre Dame's lone ranked win continues to look better and better. If they're able to beat Pitt this weekend, that'd be 2 ranked wins. But if USC is able to knock off Iowa, that is good for Notre Dame. But it's going to be a weird game because this is a home game for USC, but LA is about to get its first rain in like 7 months, and there's going to be a lot of rain this weekend. So Iowa just played a game in frigid temperatures at home against Oregon last weekend. They lose a heartbreaker on a game-winning field goal on the last play of the game, and that was like high 20s, so they're probably thinking they're going to get some relief. They're traveling to Southern California this next weekend. They should have great weather. Nope, they just so happen to travel to LA during the worst weather weekend of the entire calendar year, and I actually think that bodes well for Iowa's game plan because they like to get down and dirty, bring you into the deep end of the pool, and USC hasn't always been very fond of that, as we've seen in other physical games of the past, but Notre Dame fans should be rooting for USC to win at home in those rainy conditions. And then at night, the big one, arguably the biggest game of the weekend, Georgia hosting Texas. I think Notre Dame fans should be rooting for Georgia because if Texas has 3 losses, they might not be completely out of the playoff because they still have Texas A&M to close out the regular season. If Texas loses a nail-biter to Georgia on the road, but then they go out and they beat Texas A&M, who will likely be undefeated going into that game, a top 3 team in the entire country, I would not rule out a 9-3 Texas team making the college football playoff, but we would know that they would definitely not jump a 10-2 Notre Dame. So that's who you're going to be rooting for this weekend: Alabama, NC State, USC, and Georgia. All right, that covers everything Notre Dame needs to handle on Saturday and who you should be rooting for. But what happens after that? Let's shift to the playoff picture and the bigger picture implications for the Irish coming up next. Today's episode is brought to you by DoorDash. It's almost the weekend, time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. So for Notre Dame, Jeremiah Love delivered once again for the Irish in their win over Navy. The Irish had a comfortable 21-10 lead after halftime, but then Jeremiah Love blew the game open with a ridiculous 43-yard touchdown run to put the Irish up 28-10 and put the game away. 7 different Navy defenders were able to get a hand on him, but it wasn't enough. Love refused to go down and added another stellar highlight to his reel. When the pressure was on, Love came through. No hesitation, no delay. And just like Jeremiah Love delivers for Notre Dame, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday and keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day, only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. Welcome back to this Friday mailbag on Locked On Irish, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We wanted to thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network in America. All right, now let's get back to the questions here. And we actually got 2 that are pretty similar, so I lumped them together. At Charlie Wooding asks, which first-round team would you most like to go into their house and get the win? Texas Tech is shooting up the leaderboard, but damn, it would be great surviving I-Corps and taking down the Indiana Hoosiers as well. And then at Mitch Matt Irish asks, if all the teams currently projected to make the playoffs based on the latest rankings get in, what would your ideal matchups be for Notre Dame from the first round through the championship? We're going to focus on the first round today. I don't want to go through all the different scenarios because, look, Notre Dame has to win this weekend, right? They got to beat Pitt, but I think we can get a little bit ahead of ourselves and talk about, some ideal playoff scenarios in the first round. So selfishly, I would love to see Notre Dame upset Oregon on the road, because I would go to that game in a heartbeat. The flight to Eugene is not that far from where I live, and I think that would just be such a cool game to see Notre Dame playing in Autzen Stadium. It's one of the loudest atmospheres in all of college football. It'd be a very difficult game. It would be a tough matchup for the Irish, then all the storylines you'd have going into that game, like Dan Lanning, Marcus Freeman, 2 of the youngest coaches on the rise in college football. And then you'd have the quarterback matchup between Dante Moore, who Notre Dame went after super hard when he was a high school recruit back in the class of 2023, and then CJ Carr on the Notre Dame side. And if CJ Carr didn't commit to Notre Dame when he did, would Dante Moore have ended up committing to Notre Dame? We may never know the full story, but those 2 are very directly related. So if Notre Dame were to be able to go out there and see those 2 face off in a playoff game, that would be some storybook stuff. So that would be the main one I'd like to see. But yeah, as Charlie pointed out here, Texas Tech fans have been talking crazy on social media lately, and it really started when their head coach, Joey McGuire, had that drive-by shot at Notre Dame in his press conference after the BYU game when he was like, yeah, I appreciate BYU joining the Big 12 and not playing an independent schedule. It's like, dude, Notre Dame played a much harder schedule than Texas Tech did this year in the Big 12, and if Notre Dame ever decided to join the ACC or for whatever reason the Big 12, they would have a much easier schedule than the ones they routinely have year in and year out. But the Texas Tech fans are feeling themselves right now. This is the best season they've had in decades, and they are talking all kinds of crap to Notre Dame fans on social media. But as far as I understand it, Notre Dame and Texas Tech have never played, so it would be cool to go to Lubbock. I'd probably make the trip to that game as well, but unfortunately it'd probably be too late into the fall for me to fill out a lifelong dream with Luke Smith and our buddy Willis Pencil. We'd love to go see the Permian Panthers play on Friday Night because we love the movie Friday Night Lights, but I don't think they're playing high school football in late December, even in Texas. I've also always wanted to go to a game at Ole Miss and see the Grove, but it's probably not as nice in late December. I'd love to go back to Georgia and see another game in Athens, but I don't think it's possible for Notre Dame to play Indiana at home in the first round of the college football playoff. I think they're almost certainly going to get a bye now that they got past Penn State. They might be the 1 seed. They might be the 4 seed. So Notre Dame might end up playing Indiana again in a rematch in the college football playoff, but I highly doubt it's going to be in Bloomington. So I guess the ideal matchup for me would be Oregon, but Texas Tech is right there because that would have some real juice to it as well. All right, next up. At Irish Friars Yabos 26.2, back-to-back weeks in the mailbag for Friars Yabos. I saw USC and Michigan were against the Big Ten's new private equity deal. For the record, I love PE guys, some of my favorite classmates in Mendoza. Do you think there's a chance that USC and Michigan leave the Big Ten and go independent? If so, do you think that Notre Dame could schedule a rotating home and home with both of them? Look, I would still be stunned if USC and Michigan actually left the Big Ten, but this fight feels very legitimate, especially between Michigan and the Big Ten, because they don't have the best recent history, shall we say. I know that people at Michigan are still very upset with the way that the whole sign stealing scandal was handled ever since Tony Petitti came in and he became the commissioner of the Big Ten. I obviously have to be careful about what I say about the Big Ten, given their partnerships, but I do know that Michigan is willing to sort of plant their flag and they're not going to bend the knee because they really oppose this deal. Now, the reason that USC opposes the deal is a little bit different than Michigan. Michigan looks at this as a short-term solution for a long-term problem with the rising costs of college athletics across the board. It's not just paying the roster. You've got facilities. You've got rising coaching salaries. You've got all these other sports who need money as well. So they look at this infusion of cash as like, hey, that's great in the short term, but does it actually fix any of the problems? And then USC is mad because in this new potential private equity deal, the teams who have been around the longest in the Big Ten, they would get a greater share of that money than teams who just joined like USC. So you have two big-time programs that are really opposed to this private equity deal, but the Big Ten might go through with it anyway. And at that point, Michigan might consider actually leaving. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I would just say this. If Michigan and USC do actually leave the Big Ten because of this private equity deal, and both of those programs are probably strong enough to survive on their own as an independent, at least in the short term, right? But think about how funny that would be, right? Because for all the crap that Notre Dame fans hear from Michigan fans and USC fans about being independent, and for them to then just go full heel and back out of their own conference and then join Notre Dame as an independent would be so funny, because then all of those fans would have to admit that they are wrong and have been wrong the entire time, and we would probably get to renew the rivalry with Michigan, and it'd probably be easier to make that schedule with USC, and it'd probably look a lot like the one that they have played for the last 60 to 70 years. So I think that is actually the ideal situation here for Notre Dame fans, because then they'd get to laugh at USC and Michigan fans, and they'd also get to play them on an annual basis. So wins all around for Notre Dame in that scenario. All right, next up, we got a question from @BradyBoss77. How does the quarterback room look for the future with Carr, Minchie, Blake Hebert, and the incoming commits? You got Noah Grubbs in the class of 2026 and Teddy Gerard in the class of 2027. So, assuming Carr stays healthy, he's going to be the starter in 2027. But if he continues to progress like the way we all hope and expect him to, 2027 is probably going to be his last season at Notre Dame, because I think CJ Carr has all the talent in the world. He has all the intangibles. He has everything that NFL teams want in a first-round draft pick and potentially even a top 10 pick. So if CJ Carr continues to play well, he stays healthy, wins a bunch of games for Notre Dame, he's going to be gone after next year, because I think he could be a top 5 pick, maybe even the number 1 overall draft pick in the NFL draft. But if he makes it to that point, if he ends up being the number 1 overall draft pick, yes, it would be unfortunate that Notre Dame only gets 2 years with him as the starter, but it probably means they won a ton of games in the process. So I think we're all going to be okay in that scenario. Now, as for Kenny Minchie's future, I would be shocked if he's on the team next year for Notre Dame, because Kenny Minchie is a really good quarterback and he could start for a bunch of other programs in college football. And there are going to be a lot of suitors out there after the season who want to pay Kenny Minchie a lot of money to be their starting quarterback. And even though Notre Dame is willing to pay their backup quarterback pretty handsomely, I mean, Steve Angeli was getting paid a nice chunk of change last year when he was backing up Riley Leonard. It's just not going to be enough to compete with what Kenny Minchie is going to make as a starting quarterback elsewhere. So in that scenario, you'd have CJ Carr, you'd have Blake Hebert as a redshirt freshman as the primary backup, and then Noah Grubbs as a redshirt freshman. So I don't love that scenario, and I would actually hope that Notre Dame goes out there and they get a transfer quarterback to back up CJ Carr. And if you think that's ridiculous, no one would ever want to do that, well, look what Ole Miss did. They went into the FCS. They got Chambliss to back up Austin Simmons. Then Austin Simmons got hurt, and then Trinidad Chambliss has stepped in and replaced him, and he has done a fantastic job. Lane Kiffin is just rolling with him as the starter. And do you know where Chambliss played before Ole Miss? Ferris State. So talent's everywhere. So if Notre Dame goes out there and they find a really talented quarterback in the FCS ranks who would be willing to leave a small program where they are the starting quarterback and join a big-time program and be the backup where they're just one play away from getting on the field, I think that would be best for all parties, because then Hebert and Grubbs could continue to develop, and you're not in a situation where one play could derail your entire season. So I am encouraging Notre Dame to go in the transfer portal to get a quarterback next year, just not a starter. So looking beyond 2027, I think that's when you see if Blake Hebert has got the goods to be the starting quarterback, or maybe it's Noah Grubb as a redshirt freshman. And if either of those guys aren't ready for the moment, then you go out there and you just get another transfer quarterback to start for you. That's not the ideal scenario, but it has proven to work at Notre Dame. They just went to the national championship last year with a transfer quarterback, and the team that they lost to in Ohio State also had a grad transfer quarterback. So Notre Dame is in a great spot where they've been recruiting the quarterback position a lot better lately. So if Hebert hits or Grubbs hits or Teddy Gerard hits, they've got a great class of quarterbacks that are coming in, and I think they're recruiting really aggressively beyond that as well. So the Notre Dame quarterback position is in a really great spot. It's healthier than it's been in a long time. But every once in a while, you got to go in the transfer portal to supplement it. Next year, I think they should do it as a backup, and then hopefully they don't have to add another transfer quarterback for a long time, because they just continue to hit on all these quarterback recruits out of high school. All right, now let's wrap things up with some fun questions and maybe even a few personal stories to close out the show. That's coming up next on Locked On Irish. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. All right, we got a great slate of games tonight. Friday night in the NBA, we got the NBA Cup starting. You know what? I'm going to take the Bucks minus 10.5 at home over the Hornets. I know that's a lot of points, but I think Giannis has been playing really, really well to start the season, and they're going to cover that 10.5 point spread. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, we have a few more questions left here on this Friday mailbag edition of Locked On Irish. And this next one comes from a new Notre Dame fan. At Austin Nober, as someone who is a newer Irish fan, has the national media and college football fans always whined this much about Notre Dame not being in a conference? And can you elaborate on why Notre Dame won't join a conference? Thank you so much. All right, so in my experience, and I'm 29 years old, this has always been the case. For as long as I can remember, I had to deal with opposing fans whine about the fact that Notre Dame is independent. But their independence is the most misunderstood thing in all of college football. Like, there are people who still think that Notre Dame chooses to be independent because they make more money, which is just false. They have a really nice TV deal with NBC. They get paid roughly $50 million a year. That is less than what they'd make in the Big Ten. That is less than what the teams make in the SEC. So they are willingly accepting less money in TV revenue every single year by being an independent. But they like being an independent because it allows them to maintain some traditional rivalries like Navy, like USC. They get to travel all over the country. Now, since they joined that partnership with the ACC, they have less flexibility, less freedom with their schedule, but that is a very important part of it. And they actually used to have a lot more independent teams back in the 80s and the early 90s. Like at one point, Penn State was independent. Notre Dame and Penn State were both independents, but then Penn State ended up joining the Big Ten, and a lot of these schools just could not survive on their own, so they had to join a conference. But Notre Dame was different. They have a national brand, and then once they secured that TV deal with NBC back in the early 90s, that changed the game for everyone. I know it's a little bit different now, especially if you're new to college football. Like, all you are used to seeing is every single team is on TV every single weekend. Well, that was not always the case. Back in the day, Notre Dame was the only team that was always on TV. So that was a big part of it, and I think that TV deal made a lot of people even more upset that they got that special treatment. So I think that's where the tension was probably at its height. I think Lou Holtz actually attributes the TV deal with NBC as the reason why some of the voters didn't have them over Florida State in 1993 and potentially took away a chance to win another national championship back then. I'm pretty sure I have that right. But look, as long as Notre Dame is independent, people are going to hate them for it, and they are going to remain independent so long as they have these following three things. They need to have a TV deal that is competitive with the major conferences, which they have in NBC. They need to have a realistic path to the national championship in football, which they do. They just went to the national championship last year, and even if they expand it to 16 teams, they're going to have a path to it as well. And they need to have a home for all of their Olympic sports, which they do in the ACC. And then in hockey, I believe it's the Big Ten. So as long as they have all those things, which they do now, and they likely will for the foreseeable future, they are going to remain independent. All right, I love this question. It comes from @HistorySensei. Maybe it's just me, but when the TV shows Chris Ash, does the expression on his face look like he has no idea what's going on? It always seems like he has the same expression, but looks confused or lost. Okay, so I have also noticed Chris Ash's demeanor on the sideline, and it certainly didn't help his cause when Notre Dame was getting gashed earlier in the year. It just really, from a body language standpoint, from a perception standpoint, it just didn't look great when you got Texas A&M running down the sidelines and they're just hitting big play after big play, and Chris Ash just looks lost on the sideline. I had actually never seen him smile on camera until recently. I was going through a photo gallery and actually saw him smiling in the pregame. I could not believe it. I've literally never seen Chris Ash smile. So that was pretty funny. But to me, I don't think it's anything about Chris Ash. I don't think he's actually confused or lost on the sideline. I think part of it is just the nature of being a defensive coordinator. Like, a lot of defensive coordinators are super crazy dudes. They're never one to smile. They get really emphatic and emotional on the sideline, but it's not like happy, right? They need to be tenacious and they need to be aggressive at all times. Now, Al Golden was not like that. He was a lot more subdued. I also felt like Al Golden smiled more than the average defensive coordinator, but that's just how they are sometimes. I mean, Bill Belichick is a head coach, but he is a great defensive mind, and that dude never smiles unless he sees his 24-year-old wife or girlfriend, I guess you could call it. But she's the only person who's made him smile. Other than that, he wasn't smiling all that often on the football field. I just think for Chris Ash, that's his demeanor. And when the defense is playing well, I think it's kind of cool, and he looks like he's never satisfied, and he wants to dominate every snap. But when it's not going well for the Notre Dame defense, then yeah, everyone thinks he looks lost and confused and has no control of the situation. So I think the results in the field matter a lot more than his facial expression. All right, Pete McKeon. Name the top 3 songs that remind you of your college days at Notre Dame. So this is very funny because when I saw this question when I was at work, it really got me thinking, and it sent me down a rabbit hole, and I was listening to all kinds of classics that came out. I mean, I guess I started college in 2014, which now makes me feel super old. But I broke this up by year, and I'm just going to warn you right now, if you're not close to my age, if you're not my generation, you're probably not going to know a single one of these songs. Freshman year, Trap Queen by Fetty Wap took the world by storm spring semester, and I think Fetty Wap is in jail. He's not necessarily a one-hit wonder, but that song was absolutely massive freshman year. Anyone who's my age is going to agree with that one. Sophomore year, there wasn't like one major song that I feel like took over every school, but at least in the circles that I was rolling around in, Bricks by Carnage and Migos was huge, especially during fall semester before tailgates. Like, I remember hearing that before going to the tailgate lots all the time. And then you got Father Stretch My Hands by Kanye West. And then I know in my dorm, me and my buddy Jack Mitchell listened to the song Antidote by Travis Scott probably like 1,000 times. And then junior year, Goosebumps by Travis Scott was huge, especially during fall semester. And then Closer by the Chainsmokers is definitely a song that every single time I hear it, it takes me back to South Bend. And then in the spring, this one might be a little bit more niche, Stay by Zed. My friend group absolutely loved that song. It's a banger. It came out pretty late in second semester, so it just fit in junior year, but that's definitely got to be included. And then my senior year, I couldn't think of one right off the top of my head, but pretty much the entire Culture album by the Migos, that was super, super popular. I loved a bunch of songs on that. And then in second semester, God's Plan by Drake was absolutely massive. So there you have it. I'm sure that even if you are my age, some of those songs are going to be a little bit different depending on where you went to school, where you went to from, but where you are from, I should say, excuse me. But yeah, those songs, every single time I hear them, I just am taken back to either a dorm or Irish Crossings or Legacy Village, and I think about all the many times that I listened to those songs. All right, our last question here, it comes from Bob Helland, 447. What are your 2 greatest memories from your time at Notre Dame? One sports-related, one not. All right, I can't just give you one sports-related. So I've talked about this so many times before, I don't want to rehash it again, but when Notre Dame demolished USC in 2017, amazing game, senior year, perfect day. So that is number one sports related, but also a little bit underrated. Ben Koyak's touchdown to beat Stanford in 2014 when Notre Dame was still undefeated. That was an amazing play. Like 4th and long, it looked like Notre Dame was dead in the water. That was an absolutely miserable game. Everett Golson dances around and just throws a seam to Ben Koyak, who catches the ball, brings it in, stays in bounds for the game-winning touchdown. That was awesome. And then a basketball memory. When Notre Dame knocked off Duke in 2014, or maybe it was 2015 by that point. That was awesome because that team had like Julio Okafor, Tyus Jones, and I actually waited out in line for that one. It's the only time when I was in college where I really waited. I wanted to be in the front row of the Legion, and it paid off. I was there. It was an awesome game. Notre Dame won that game, and they had just a truly special run that year with Jarian Grant, Pat Connaughton. Their season ended in the Elite Eight to that undefeated Kentucky team. They almost knocked them off, but that was an awesome basketball game. And back when I was a student, the basketball team was really, really good, and going to those games was really fun. And then lastly, for the sports-related one, I got to include it. Winning the Interhall Championship in Notre Dame Stadium. They don't have full contact, full pad Interhall football at Notre Dame anymore, but they did when I was there. And my senior year, Dylan won it in a 2-0 barn burner over Duncan Hall. But that was awesome. And the celebration after at Brothers was even better. Okay, non-sports related. So I'm kind of cheating here. I was technically not a student at Notre Dame at the time because I don't know if I've really talked about it too much on this podcast, but I went to Holy Cross my freshman year. I did the Rudy route. I did all that. But I'll never forget this. My very last day of freshman year at Holy Cross, I took my last final, and I was done. I walked over to the Notre Dame campus, and it was a gorgeous day. Like, it was probably high 70s, and I realized that I was done. And going to Holy Cross after being denied acceptance from Notre Dame out of high school, like, that was just a truly devastating moment in my life because I wanted to go to Notre Dame and go to school there since I was like 5 years old. So I took the denial really hard. At one point, I was kind of like, screw Notre Dame, I'm not going there. I was going to go to Kentucky, maybe Miami of Ohio. And then my mom urged me to go to Holy Cross, see what they had to offer, and then talk to the Notre Dame admissions office and ask them why I didn't get in. Well, they told me point blank the reasons why. Won't get into that on here, but they said, hey, if you went to Holy Cross, you'd be you'd have a good chance of getting in as a transfer so long as I got really good grades my freshman year. So while all my friends were having the time of their lives their freshman year, joining fraternities, going to schools like Kentucky, Miami, Cornell, Vanderbilt, like, they were having such a fun time, I was studying every single day on the weekends, right across the street from the place that denied me. So it was a really, really rough year for me and not a whole lot of fun. But by the time I took my last final, I had already been accepted to transfer to Vanderbilt. So I already knew I was in good shape. And you know what? Like, my sophomore year, I was going to be okay. I wasn't going to be at Holy Cross for another semester. But when I took my last final, and then when I went over to the Grotto, I had this rush of just pure joy, knowing that, one, it was over, and I did it. Like, nothing in life has ever come close to touching that pure, like, bliss, just knowing that I was kind of through the situation, and I was like proud of myself in that moment. So I was so happy. I got in the car and I was just like beaming ear to ear, listening to some music the whole ride home back to Louisville, because at that point I was like, I didn't know if I was going to get into Notre Dame, but I knew that I gave it everything I had. And that was just a really special moment. So I'm going to get off my soapbox now. That was kind of a random emotional moment to end the show on, but that is going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Irish. Thanks again for tuning in. And of course, making this your first watch or listen of the day, and for hanging with me all week long. It was a fun week on the show. And if you have not already, please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to like, rate, and review, because it helps more Notre Dame fans find the show. Enjoy the game tomorrow. I'm going to be right back here after the game goes final for an instant reaction to Notre Dame's game against Pitt. Should be a really fun game, guys. Have a great weekend, and go Irish.